Welcome to part 2 of the Woodland patch quilt using delicious fabrics by Nutex in New Zealand. These are so much fun little woodland friends fabrics with all these little foxes and rabbits and trees and things you find in the woodlands. So nice. So we've already made all our blocks. We showed you last time how to get all the blocks together, and now we've got to this stage of the pattern where we're going to start joining up the rows. So I've already started joining mine. So I'm just going along row by row. We've got alternating of the framed square and the 9 patches, and when I've pressed the seams, I've pressed them towards the frame so that the little extra seam in there helps it sit nice and flat. So basically the seam's going up here and down here and up here and down here, and because of that, when I've joined my little on point squares, I've alternated the pressing of the seams there so that when they join the rows together, these are vertical rows that we're doing, but when we join those together, the seams at the joining point will snuggle nicely. So I just thought that was a little point to consider so that everything sits nice and flat when we join them up. So the pattern's showing us how that we've got these rows to do. If you've made your blocks the same as mine, you can just follow through, but it's basically alternating a 9 patch and a framed square and then a whole row of the little on point squares. So there's 7 blocks in a row and there's 7 rows across, so that makes it pretty straightforward. It's going to be square. So we'll get on with joining the rest of our rows and join them up, and so they all get joined up into one block, and then I'll come back and show you how to add on the borders. So I've put all my block rows together. I've made my rows and I've now got my panel. So that's what this whole center panel is that's sitting here. And now we're going to add some borders. So there's actually 3 borders that go on this quilt. So we've got, let me find my picture. We've got a striped border, which is a little bit wider, then we've got a narrow dark border, and then we've got this pieced border that goes on the outside. So initially I'll show you how we go about putting on the first striped border, and we'll talk about the next one, and then we'll show you how to do the piecing for the main border. So when you get a quilt to this stage and you've got to put a border on the sides, we need to measure for borders, because you could just sew your strip of fabric on and when you run out, that's kind of enough, but then you're not sure whether it's the same length this side as this side and the top and bottom and things like that, and it's a really good idea to keep your quilt square. So to do that we need to measure. Now this should be square, so it should be the same measurement across as it is up and down. And we know that these blocks were 6 inches and there's 7 of them, so if we do the maths and we multiply 7 by 6, we get to 42, plus we've got a little seam allowance on the end, so it should measure something close to 42.5 inches across. So the best way to measure a quilt, and particularly if it's a little bit larger, because this is probably quite manageable, and you've probably kept things fairly good with your seam allowances. And so if I measure this across, oh my goodness, look at that. We're right on 42.5 inches. That's pretty impressive. I'm pleased. And it's a good idea to measure 2 or 3 times so that you get a sort of an average, so that if there are little discrepancies, and oh my goodness, look at that, it's 42.5 again. I'm pretty pleased with this quilt. We need to also measure it in the other direction because we'll be putting side borders on. In fact, we're doing the side borders first, so we really need to make sure we know what the sides are. Let's get the right end of the tape measure, and we'll come up here and we'll measure, and we've got 42.5. Look at that. I'm so impressed. And we'll come along again and measure. So 2 or 3 times to get an average of your measurement, in case there are little differences, and there can easily be differences because we're working with fabric. It's a movable commodity. So this one here actually measures just slightly over the 42.5, just an 1/8 of an inch over. So I'm not going to worry about that because that amount I can just ease in. So I will still call that 42 as far as cutting my border sides go. So we're doing the sides first, or 42.5 I should say. And so we need to cut a strip for each side first, because we're going to do the sides first and then we're going to put the top and bottom on. Now they're going to be longer because they've got to extend past what we're just sewing onto the sides. So we'll do the sides first. Because it's 42.5, there's a good chance that's going to fit a regular width of fabric strip. We generally allow about 42 inches, but 42.5, there's often that amount there. So if I was going to be cutting for 42.5 and I've checked my fabric and it is more than that, this one's measuring 44 inches, so I know I can get 42.5 inches out of that strip. If it's not big enough, if it's a larger quilt, you might want to join your strips together and then cut your border length. So to cut something that size on a mat, because I don't have a mat that's 42.5 inches, I could measure it out with my tape measure, or I can fold the fabric in half, put the fold back at the 0 point of my measurements on my mat, spread that out, and I can do the two sides at once this way, spread them out, keep them straight along the lines on the mat, and then we want half, because it's now double, we want to cut that, so we folded it in half, we want to halve the measurement, so it was 42.5, we now want it to be 21.25. So we've got to the 21.25 we want to measure along, so I've got my number starting from this end and I'm coming along so that my ruler sits at 21.25. So you can line up the top and the bottom with the other markings on the board of your ruler so that it's going to be right through that 21.25, because that's half of 42.5. And I can cut them both at the same time, don't need those little bits. And now I've got my two side border strips which I'm going to stitch onto the sides, and they're both exactly the same size. So this helps square up a quilt if it's gone slightly out of kilter and things. If you make your sides as near as possible to exactly the same length and the top and bottom and things, it helps keep quilts nice and square rather than just stitching it on and hoping it's about right. This is a way of doing it so that we know that it's right. So now I'm just going to go ahead and sew the two sides on, and then press those open, and I'll double check the measurements again, because by then of course we've made the quilt larger, it's wider, we've added on the border strip, so it will be another 4 inches that we've added in. So it's going to be, instead of the 42.5, it's going to be 46.5, we hope. So I'll go ahead, I'll put my sides on, I'll measure it, and I'm going to put the top and bottom on. I'm also going to go ahead and do exactly the same thing with the next border. These were the long strips we cut from the panel stripe, from the fabric that had the 5 different colours in it. And so these are already quite long, so we'll just need to cut them to length. So we'll be able to again measure the quilt, check the measurements that we think it should be correct, cut it to length, sew the sides on first and then the top and bottom. And then I'm going to come back and I'll show you when I've got to that stage and show you how we make the nice piece border to go around there. So I've gone ahead and I've attached my striped border, and I've attached my dark narrower border as I was showing you beforehand, which means that in the pattern we've now attached both of these as shown there, so we've ended up with this here. So that's looking pretty good. I'm pretty pleased, everything's come up nicely, the borders all fit, it's all sitting nice and square. What more could we want? Oh, maybe another border. So now we're going to do a nice piece border to go around the outside. So in the picture here you can see that we've got these large triangles with quite a large white area. So I'm just going to show you how to put all that together. There's some aspects of this that make it, shall we call it a slight challenge, only because we'll be working with fabric. When we've cut our squares in half, remember we cut these squares from the colour stripe panel, from the one that had the 5 fabrics across, and we needed to cut them in half diagonally. So that's all in the notes for the cutting. And what that then means is that that diagonal line that we're going to be using is now on the bias. And what the bias means is it's on the diagonal, which means it stretches. So a regular fabric, if you just pull along the straight, there's a little bit of give in it, but not a lot. If you pull along a diagonal cut, there's a whole lot more give. So it's much more stretchy, so you have to be more careful when you're pressing, that you don't press a stretch in it, and when you're handling it, when you're sewing it. So it just makes it a little bit harder to work with, but certainly not impossible, just means that you need to be aware, to be careful of that. Because that whole edge is going to be going against the quilt, like against the previous border. So all the triangles will have that slightly wavy tendency to them, so we just have to manage them as we go. So I'll show you how to do that. When we're making this piece border, we start off, we've already done our cutting, I'm assuming, and we've got some triangles of those colours that we cut. we've got some white rectangles, and we've got some white triangles. We also should have 4 squares that will be the corner squares of the border. So we don't need those ones just yet. We will be using the triangles and the rectangles and the white triangles. So I'm just going to show you what I've done there. We need to start off with a triangle and a rectangle. So the triangles are sitting basically straight on, the rectangles are coming off at an angle. So we need to join those together. So we will do that while you're watching. So this is quite straightforward. It's all straight edges, so there's no problem with sewing any of this together. The rectangle is slightly shorter than the triangle, which is what we want because we're wanting to come through at about the 1/4 inch seam allowance so that that little point just sticks out. So I'll go ahead and I'll stitch this seam here and press it to show you how I'm doing all that. So this is quite straightforward. You won't have any problems doing this. Not that I think you'll have any problems doing any of it. So that's that seam done. So we're going to press that, and we're going to press that, I'll just move this out of our way. We're going to press that into the triangle. It doesn't particularly matter, but it ends up helping things sit nice and flat. So we're just going to lift that up from the right side and let that just press over. So along the border, each border is the same size because we've got a square quilt, and the only difference is that the corner squares will add the extra length. So each of the 4 sides are made the same length, which is really convenient. We can just make 4 the same. It's just that the colours that we're using, and I have simply rotated. I've gone orange, blue, yellow, grey, orange, blue, yellow, grey, and just continued on around the quilt. You can choose, of course, how you put yours together, but that's what I've done. So I'm just going to start on this side border here. So I'm going to show you that I've done a yellow one already, and I have one sitting here, I thought. Okay, this can be my yellow one that we've just made. And then we've got some more colours. So you could go ahead and attach your triangles. 5 of the 6, there's 6 triangles along each border. 5 of them have this rectangle on. So you could go ahead and get all of those ready so that then you can come back and join them up. The ends are treated a little bit differently because we need to add some different triangles to make things fit. So I've gone ahead and done quite a few of mine. So that one's ready there to show you. So then on our notes, we'll get this. So the one at the far end, at this far end of the border, has got to have one of these half square triangles of the white. Now, it's going to be this grey triangle and the white triangle. The white triangle is larger. It was cut from a larger square, but that won't worry us too much. We're going to join it so that the grey sits in, and we're just going to join one side strip there so that when that's opened out, the white is going to extend a little bit along, and that's fine. We can trim that off afterwards. This border does get trimmed, so there's no big problems with things like that. So I'm just going to join this one. So this is the 6th triangle along. The first 5 have the rectangles. The 6th one has only a triangle. And again, we're going to press that into the triangle, the coloured one. And you can see that if that's going next to that, how that's going to fit there. And we're going to have some funny top edges at the moment. They're going to get trimmed off. Now the triangle at the beginning of our border, that's the one up this end, has got its rectangle already on it, but we need to fill in this little corner up here. So again, one of the white triangles. So this is my piece here. It's got the rectangle already on it. Now I need to put one of these triangles on it so that it fills up that little corner space. So that we can go right sides together, and we're going to stitch from down there right up here. this looks a little confusing. It's not nearly so bad when you're actually doing it. Again, this top triangle has got a bias edge, so just be careful you don't stretch it. It should just sit there and sew nicely for you. And I'm going to press that . And this time I'm going to press it away from the coloured triangle. And that allows this, where it joins on here, to sit nice and flat and just makes everything a little bit easier to work with. So it's looking a little bit of a strange shape, however, it's definitely the right shape. Because we're going to go from that at one end, and maybe I should move all of this out of our way. And then we're going to join the next one on here. And I might just do that just again, just to show you how the seams are going to sit. So we're going to lay that on top there, but I have found that it's easiest to sew with the white on top and the colour underneath. And again, we're going to have the little corner protruding out that end. So where we start sewing, those fabrics should cross over at the 1/4 inch point there. And if it doesn't move, it will behave itself quite nicely. And again, just a straight stitch 1/4 inch in from that edge all the way to the end of the white rectangle. This is a fun border. You're going to love doing it. It's not really as complicated as it might look. And again, I'll bring the iron and press that. Now, generally speaking, with a longer border, a larger ironing space is probably quite a good idea. Okay, so now I'm going to sit this way, because again, I want to press that seam towards the white rectangle so that where it overlaps here, where we've joined it, it all sits nice and flat. So because we've got the little corner here, just make sure that's sitting nice and flat as well. Press that over. Make sure you're not stretching that lower bias edge of your triangles, and that's how it's all going to go together. So we're going to have these top bits sticking up, but we are going to be trimming those off. So we'll continue to add on more triangles in just the same way with their rectangles, right till we get to the end, when we're going to put on that last one that had its little triangle there. So this is obviously not going to go next to that one, but you can just see that will join on, and that will give us another straight edge at the other end after we've put all these other triangles on. But I will show you one now that I have put together so that I can show you how we're going to trim it so that it all fits a quilt. So I've still got all these to sew, but I have done one border here ready to show you. So this is one side. We've got to make 4 of these. So I think you can see that it's a little bit not the right shape at the moment. It is hopefully the right length. We can check the length. We know that when we finish doing this quilt, the last border that we put on, if yours measures the same as mine, was 48.5 inches long. So that's the size we're working with. All 4 sides will be the same. And so this quilt border here should measure, we are going to be trimming off here, and it should measure 48.5 inches long. And I have checked mine, and it's actually pretty good, but I've got to trim this off first. But you can see how these edges are wanting to go a little bit wavy. Just be a little bit aware of that, and I'll show you how to cope with that when we sew it on. So to trim off the edge, I want to trim to that corner. I'm going to line these up with a straight line on my board, and the point with one of the lines going up, so that I can just come in here and trim off that extra white that we don't need on the end there. And the way we attach that triangle to the first one, that already is going through the point there. So we've got a nice border point to point. We just now want to make it the right width because it is too wide with those big points on it. So the border is going to be 6.5 inches wide. The pattern tells you all these things. And because of that, it would be very helpful if you have a ruler that is 6.5 inches wide. If you don't, there's other ways you can manage. You can manage with markings on the board and all sorts of other things. But I do happen to have one that's the right width. So I'm going to line up one edge of my ruler with one edge of my border here. And I'm going to just come along, and you can hopefully you can see that where we've joined the stitching is just a little bit past where we're going to cut. So we're just going to do this, and then we'll slide it along and do the rest of it. So that's looking pretty good. We don't need those bits that we're trimming off. Now, we don't have to particularly line it up with the markings on the board. I just find it's easier if things are sitting nice and straight. And again, I'm going to line this up, 6.5 inches wide. So my edge is lined up here with my border edge. I'm going to bring this along. And there's just a little bit on this triangle, the white triangle, because it was cut a little bit larger. It also will just trim just a little bit though, not as much as we're trimming off these. So just that little bit. We don't need that anymore. And there we have a nice border ready to go. So that's looking pretty exciting. Now we have to work out how to attach that because of these little stretchy triangles. And also just be aware now that we've cut through this on the diagonal, this also is a little bit stretchy. So this little piece is a little bit risky, but I think you can manage. Okay, so I'm just going to put this along one edge of my quilt here. I'm going to pin it, or in fact I'm going to use clips because pins and I are not really good friends. So I'm going to mark the centre of my quilt, the centre of the edge here with a little clip, and I'm going to do the same on the border. Well, we know where the centre is really because of where the triangles meet, so this is obviously going to be where it meets. So we'll lay this out, and we want to put the centre one against that centre mark that we've just made there. And then we're going to do the same, pop a clip in up here so that these ends are level. And then you can see it's just wanting to be a little bit blousy here. We're not really happy with blousy, but we have got to just ease that just a little bit, and it's because those triangles just stretch a bit when we iron them and handle them. So we can pop a couple more clips in there, and then when you sew it, if you have this side underneath, that will just ease in, as long as it's not great big pleats and things, of course. We don't want big pleats in there. If your border is just simply the wrong size, you may need to trim a little bit, take a slightly larger seam allowance if it's too big, or something like that. Then when we're doing pieced borders, they cut that needs to sort of fit the previous one. That's where doing some of the more accurate seam allowances can help us a lot. Or it's also where, when we've done this like a narrow border here, you could adjust the size of that border a little bit. You could trim it down or something like that if you needed to. So that's already clipped on there. We're going to stitch that along there now, and that'll all be done. And so that's what we need to do with 4 sides. And the other thing when you do, so put the sides on first, and I've gone and pinned that to the top, but never mind, we're going to put the side borders on first, and then the top and bottom border are going to have your corner squares attached before we attach them to the quilt, because that gives us the extra length once you've got your side borders on. So that's really straightforward now. You can go ahead and add your borders, and then I'll come back and show it to you when I've finished adding mine. So I've managed to get all the borders on the quilt, and I'm really pleased with the results. I'm hoping you can see most of this quilt. It's It's a good size. It's a great size for popping on the floor, on the back of the couch, wrapping up a child in, wrapping up 2 children in. What else can we use a quilt for? So the borders have gone on well. I've got my corner squares in. Everything is sitting nicely. So that's it for this this segment, and I'm going to come back and we'll do video 3. We'll show you how we're going to quilt and bind the quilt. So that's it for this one. Don't forget, have a look on the website for the pattern. It's GourmetQuilter.com. The pattern is called Woodland Patch, and the fabrics are by Nutex.